Hello there, my name is Neil O'Brien, and the topic for today's webinar is activity-based costing, or ABC. Now, if you're interested in getting very accurate product costing and you're interested in reducing your costs, then the next 20 minutes or so may be very interesting for you, because ABC is very, very effective at delivering both those things, both very accurate product costing and helping you reduce your costs. Now, quick background to this: about 20 years ago I was working for a large manufacturing company, and I'd known about ABC. I was interested in doing it, and luckily for me the company was also interested in doing it. And I remember before we started the project, I went and identified companies around the place, around Ireland, that had introduced ABC, and I went and spoke to quite a few of them and met them. And the thing that struck me was that almost every single one of them, their experience of ABC was positive, or very, very positive, as in the project delivered what they wanted it to do. Now, I'm sure, as an owner in business, you realize if you're doing projects, sometimes they're successful in terms of delivering, other times maybe not. So that's one thing that always struck in my head, is that ABC seemed to be very effective in terms of companies who introduced it found it very, very good. And it's not that widely introduced. Now, you may or may not have come across the term, but I think about only 3% of companies globally ever introduce ABC. Now, I'm going to talk about it in the context of manufacturing companies, and if you're processing and making goods. Now, it can also be used for service businesses, and I know banks and insurance companies have used it quite successfully, but the context of my talk today is going to be about manufacturing. So if you have a manufacturing company, you're interested in more accurate product costing and reducing your cost, then the next 20 minutes or so should be very interesting for you. So again, here's the main benefits, as I just touched on it. The number one you get is very accurate product costing, because ABC makes a link between the activities, that means what people are doing in the various departments and sections of your company, the cost drivers that cause those activities, and links it over to cost. So you have a clear link between the actual costs, say for example salaries, activities, what people do on a daily, weekly basis, the cost driver, and a link over to product cost. So it's fabulous, and I have some examples to show you as we go along through this webinar. The second thing is cost reduction, and again I'll tell you a bit about this as we go through it. It can be great for challenging budget figures, increases at budget time, things like inefficiencies in your business, identifying it, knowing where the inefficiency is, and then being able to do something about it. And the third thing it can be very good at is benchmarking. Now, I know unfortunately in Ireland benchmarking became a kind of a dirty word in recent years, because it was used to give a lot of public servants pay increases in the good times for productivity improvements, which never came, and it totally inflated our public payroll bill and so on. But benchmarking has been around a long time, and it's very effective, because what you're doing is you're comparing apples with apples, and if you can get the right comparisons, it can be very powerful. And I have an example of that further on as well. So I worked for a large pharmaceutical company, and I was solely responsible for introducing ABC in 3 different manufacturing plants in Ireland. And the main benefits we got, well, one of them was this product X, where we managed to save 7.4 million, which was pretty amazing. And again, further on I have some more details on that. I suppose, if you're an accountant, or an accountant background, or accountants at budget time, I remember going through that process before and feeling a bit helpless, because people will come along with increases at budget times, and you mightn't be happy with them, but quite often you couldn't do much about them. Whereas after going through the ABC project, we had such a great understanding of our costs and what drove those costs and where inefficiencies already were, that at budget time we were able to challenge managers that were coming along with increases, and successfully challenge them, because we could challenge them with data, hard facts and data. We could challenge any increases that were coming along at budget time, and over a 2-year period we saved about 2 million euros, which was pretty impressive. And again, benchmarking, we did some very interesting stuff comparing 2 Irish plants with an American one, and that brought a lot of additional savings. So they were just some of the main benefits that we got that very first time I went through an ABC project with a large pharmaceutical manufacturing company in Ireland. Now, this is just me briefly my background. I trained as a management accountant. I worked in the UK for a while in London. I worked in Florida. I came back to Ireland, started my own business in 2003. And I use the likes of ABC and 80/20 to drive sales and profits, and also to help reduce costs. And I really am passionate about analysing numbers and spotting opportunities to grow sales and to reduce costs. That's my real forte. And ABC, I love, absolutely love ABC and 80/20. Two of my favourite topics and areas I suppose I do have a lot of expertise in. Now here's the definition. It's a bit wordy, but I'll read it out. So activity-based costing is a costing methodology that identifies activities in an organisation and assigns the cost of each activity with resources to all products and services according to the actual consumption by each. I said that is quite wordy. I have some slides further on that kind of give the same message. But I suppose the main thing to think about is called activity-based costing. You're costing it based on the activity, what people do. So if one product has, in a QC lab and maintenance, if there's a lot of activity, so people have to spend a lot of time on product A and less time on product B, then the costing method picks that up. Whereas traditional costing methods, they've been around a long time, the absorption costing method and so on, and they're quite basic in some sense. I think they allocate costs using averages very much. They do it on a very arbitrary basis. So quite often historically it used to be labour hours or machine hours or whatever, which doesn't actually reflect the activity of what goes on in all the departments. And that's why quite often traditional costing methods, I think, throw up costing which is not very accurate. And I have one very good example of this further on, a comparison of traditional costing methods and ABC, and it's pretty amazing the difference that came out comparing those two methods. So it's really your cost, and I'll show you in a moment. I have a slide that shows this very well. So you can start off with all your overhead costs, because again, I suppose with with direct materials and your material suppliers, it shouldn't be too difficult to allocate those to product. Direct labour, similarly, it should be possible without too much trouble to allocate those to products. So normally overheads is the cost that you're looking at with an ABC project are the overhead costs, because the other ones should be easier to allocate to product. Now, direct labour can be included in this as well, if necessary. So it depends on the type of business and how easy it is to trace labour to product. Okay, so why ABC? Like I said earlier on, why would you consider ABC? Well, there has to be some reason for introducing it. So a product costing, I suppose, is probably the main reason. I mean, cost reduction, yes, absolutely. Most people introduce ABC because they want more accurate product costing. Now think about it for a moment. If your product costs are arrived at by using traditional methods, the problem there may be that they're not very accurate. So think about it. If your costing method at the moment costs a product that's too low, then that's an issue. If it costs it too high, that's also an issue, because if you think about it, you're going to take your product cost, most businesses are going to add on a margin. Now, if the product cost is too high and you add your margin onto it, your product may be too high and uncompetitive, so you're going to lose sales. If your product cost is too low and you add a margin on, then yeah, you get the sales, but you may be losing money on it. So having inaccurate product costing has huge implications for a business. ABC gives very accurate product costing. The cost reduction and benchmarking, as it was in my head, they're almost secondary benefits to the product costing, but a lot depends on your own circumstances, where your business is, and why you're looking at ABC. Now, here's an example of just one department, and again, I appreciate there's a lot of numbers on here, but I suppose it's hard to show ABC without getting into numbers. So here's a quality control department, and if you look at the first column down the left hand side, you'll say here's the annual cost for that department. So salaries, the total is 1 million, salaries are 720,000, maintenance, motor expenses, etc. And the next column we have activity, the one beyond that is cost driver, and then product cost. So if you look at the salaries, this is a quality control department. What do? They have analysts that test product. Raw material comes in the door, it has to be tested. They make batches, they make products, and quite often when the product is batch is halfway through, it'll have to be tested at different stages. They do in-process tests, they do finished goods tests when the product is finished and before it's shipped. So tests are the basis of what they do. Just the next one down is maintenance. They have lots of equipment which has to be calibrated and checked. This is down to the manufacturer's requirements and so on. So the activities are what goes on in that department, and the cost driver is what's causing that activity. So again, if you look at the top one, the salaries, all the analysts are doing various tests in the lab. That's driven by the number of batches. Now that seems pretty obvious, but the number of batches will determine, product A has 10 raw materials. When they come in the door, they have to be tested and so on. So it does drive them. So when you look at it, you will find cost drivers for your activities. And once you identify the activities, you see down the end, the activities, when you look at them and find out what they are, you can cost those as well. And then you use your cost drivers to drive your activity over to product. Now, in theory, I know ABC can be a bit difficult to get your head around, and I remember before I did it for the first time, in theory, I was there asking myself, well, what's an activity? What's the cost driver? But what I found is once you actually get into it and start doing it, these things become much more apparent, and it makes an awful lot more sense. So it's one of these things that theoretically may be a little bit difficult to grasp at times, but I found myself once we got into it, it just became so clear what an activity was, what the cost driver was, and how to get the cost over to product. So you can see the product cost then on the right hand side. Now, I mentioned earlier on an example of absorption costing or traditional costing in ABC. Now, your business, if you think about your own business at the moment, you have some method of getting your overhead to product. It may be some what I call absorption type, it may be labor hours, it may be some general method of getting your cost over to product. Now, again, when I was working for one of those companies many years ago, pharmaceutical manufacturing company, the company I was working for had been taken over a couple of years before, and at the time they were like a subcontract manufacturer, so they made pharmaceutical products for other companies, and they'd actually tied themselves into a long-term contract and really big volumes on this product. I'll call it product X, huge volumes, and they had come up with a price of €10 per kg. Now this was just the overhead cost because the customer would supply the material free issue, so they didn't charge them for all the materials. So it was really the overhead that the company was charging for. So you can see, if you look at the left hand side here, there's two totals down the end. Total cost per kg is €8, which was the traditional costing method. They sold the product for €10 per kg. Now, on the right hand side, we did the activity-based costing analysis, and we came up with a total of €20 per kg. Now, what actually happened was I went along to a management meeting and presented these figures, and quite a few managers at the meeting were involved in setting the original price, which was €8, and I was coming along saying, actually guys, I think it's 20. So as you can imagine, is the equivalent now of dropping a grenade into this room. These people were not very happy. So my boss got me to go away and double check the figures, and I did go away and double check the figures. And again, I'm just going to go back to the previous slide. I double checked the figures. One of the real pluses and things I love about ABC is that you can trace the whole way back from product cost, your cost driver, to your activity, to your cost, your actual nominal ledger. You can trace over and back. There's full traceability the whole way. And we went back and double checked the figures, and there was absolutely no change at all, because we'd gathered the data. If you think about it, this is the quality control department. So just come back here for a moment. If you look at quality control now in the middle of the page, it was 250 originally. We came up with 670. We came up with 670 on using the ABC method. Now, just going back to the quality control department, the activities there in the second column, all the activities that we picked up and costed, we either went in there and gathered those ourselves, or we got them from the manager. But whatever way we got them, we got these figures. We costed the activities. We would have gone back to each manager of that department and said, can you have a look at these and tell us, are you happy with them? What do you think of them? So in a way, these managers, we'd gather the information, and the managers of each department had okayed the figures. So when I was presenting a figure there of quality control, 670 of the total of €20, we'd already gone through the process of gathering this information and checking it with each manager. So even though they weren't happy with the figures, it was kind of difficult for them to disagree with the figures. So it gave very, very accurate product costing that you can stand over 100%. And again, if you think about your current costing method and how it's done, if somebody was asking you to defend any of your product costing, could you stand up there hand in heart and say this is 100% accurate? I'm guessing it's probably unlikely, because it's done in such a general way. Whereas even after that grenade being dropped in that room, I was able to go away, double check the figures, and come back here and justify every single one of them, which is a very powerful thing to be able to do. So just moving on, the second big plus we got from this project, so we got a very accurate product costing. The second big plus we got was being able to challenge figures at budget time, which as an accountant I was never able to do before, because managers would come along once a year looking for an extra 10 or 20%, they wanted extra staff and so on, and they'd be justifying it. And as an accountant, you might try and argue against it, but it was very difficult. Whereas armed with the information we had already, we knew that some departments, through benchmarking and so on, effectively had too many people. We had their activities, we knew what they did, we knew what, because I was in 2 plants at the time, which was brilliant actually. I was able to compare 2 quality departments, 2 maintenance departments, and quite often sometimes they were doing the same output, but one might have an extra 10 staff. So this was brilliant, because we were able to successfully challenge managers at budget times, and that led to savings of €2 million over a 2-year period. And that was really powerful for us. And I remember my boss just being thrilled, and even the general manager being thrilled, because this was real kind of tangible success for us. And the managers they might have liked it, but I suppose they could understand that they actually had enough resources. There was maybe a 30 or 40% volume growth both years, but some of these departments had so much fat and so much inefficiency that they were able to absorb this extra volume with the same resources they had, which was fabulous for us. So again, challenging budget, identifying inefficiencies, and benchmarking are other ways that you can use ABC to reduce costs. Now, here's an example. Again, there's a lot of data on this sheet, but if you look at the top, we have direct labour and overheads, and I just left material out of it just to keep it as simple as possible. Now what I'm saying here is absorption costing will allocate €2 overhead for product for every €1 direct labour. Because the total annual labour is 1 million, the overheads are 2 million. So what they're going to do is for every €1 direct labour, they're going to allocate €2 overhead. So if you look at the example, costing using absorption costing, product A and product B both have the same direct labour, 100 and 100, so they're allocated the same overhead. Yes, and the total is 300, number of units 10, unit cost 30. It's the same for product A, the same for product B. Now if you get down another bit, you'll see in reality product B actually requires twice the quality test and twice the maintenance and so on. So product A uses a lot more overheads than product B uses more overheads than product A. So using ABC, if you look down, you'll actually see the product A's overhead is 150, product B's overhead is 300, and the unit cost, product A is 25, unit cost product B is 40. Whereas using absorption costing, they both got allocated the exact same overhead. So in reality, product A should have been 25, product B should be 40, and that's just another quick example of how ABC can give really accurate product costing. And again, if you're taking your product cost, like most businesses are, and adding on a margin, then you need your product costing to be really accurate, because if it's too low, you're going to lose money. If it's too high, you're not going to get the sales. You're going to be losing out on sales big time. So the other thing that's really, really interesting about ABC is that when you're costing your activities, as I showed you with the quality department earlier on, there's 3 types of activity, and you can actually tag activities, and this is often done after the initial product costing. You can go back and tag all these. Value added is about 33%, non-value added is about the same, a third, and sustaining is 34%. Now what are these terms? I have a definition of value added in a moment. Sustaining is kind of the administration, the compliance, the stuff that has to be done to run your business. Now here's a here's a happy customer there, little baby. Value added, the definition of that is that it's necessary to make the product and the customer is happy to pay for it. Now if you think about it, if you made a batch of product, you had a production run, and let's just say it didn't work out right first time, it had to be reworked. Now you might say, is it necessary to make the product? Well, it is, to rework it again. Would the customer be happy to pay for it? No, probably not. Why would the customer want to pay for your product to be reworked? They wouldn't be happy. So value added, back in a moment. So if you have a company and you have 10 million of overheads, what it says is that value added is about a third, non-value added is about a third, so that's just over 3 million, and sustaining. So non-value added, now non-value added is the opposite of value added. So we're saying is something that's happening, it's not necessary for the product to be made, and the customer would not be happy to pay for it. So non-value added could be, if stuff is reworked, if there's inefficiencies in your business, excessive administration, that type of thing. So this is where you can get huge savings. And I know one particular company in the whole, let's say in the vision sector, that I visited just before I introduced the ABC for the first time, and they'd reduced their overheads by about 35% by this very process. They went through their activities, they identified the non-value added, and they started stripping them out of the business, and they were making huge savings in their overheads. So this is just a little example there. You can see in the quality control I showed you earlier on, the product X, where the total product cost was 20 down the end. If you look at quality control of 670, of that 670 you can split that out, so you can see value added is 320, non-value added is 190, and sustaining is 160. And you can do that for each cost in each department. So you can imagine your non-value added is going to build up and build up, and if it's anything like the norm, it could come in at about 3 million if your overheads were 10 million. So you could start tackling that and reducing your overhead costs. Benchmarking was another huge area where we got savings, and this was a very, very interesting, because what you do with ABC is you go in and you identify the activities of what people do. So you have the output, effectively the output of their department. And there was a maintenance department, there was 2 plants in Cork, and there was one in the US which had also done an ABC exercise. So what we were able to do is we were able to compare the 2 Irish plants with the US plant and rank them next to each other. Now these are just rough numbers, but I do remember that the US plant was the most efficient. So maybe in terms of preventative maintenance checks or calibrations or whatever, they were doing an average of 8 per person per day. The Irish plants were 4 and 6. And I know over the period of about 6-12 months there was different site visits and a lot of chats went on, and that benchmarking led to huge productivity improvements, because the US plant was the best performing one. So say plant number 2 Ireland was trying to move from 6 to an 8, plant 1 Ireland was trying to move from a 4 to a 6 and then up towards an 8. So it led to huge productivity improvements, and it was a very, very interesting exercise. So again, just to summarize, ABC, what's it all about? If you're interested in getting very accurate product costing, ABC does a fabulous job, an absolutely fabulous job. As almost a secondary benefit can be if you want to reduce your costs, like the non-value added I showed you and so on. Again, it's fabulous because the non-value added falls out of doing the product costing, so it's almost like a byproduct. And the benchmarking, like I just showed you, internally or externally, can be very, very effective. If you can compare apples with apples, it can be a very, very effective way of reducing your costs. Okay, that's me, Neil O'Brien. If you'd like any more information, you can contact me, neil@quantum.ie. Hope you find this useful, and thanks very much for listening.